Awesome. Alrighty, guys. Welcome to week 14, day 3 of Platoon. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about something called user authentication. But before we jump into user auth, I just want to walk through a sample application that was developed a while ago. Super simple, one model. Just want to talk through it, get the general Django structure down, see our sample data, and then we can talk about where authentication comes into the mix. So this is a very simple app. You've got your app here is the wines app, and you have a single model, which is the wine model, inside of your wine API. So you've got like a name, price, varietal, description, and then like time of creation. You've got a simple string. So when you print out your wine, it just returns the name. Nice and easy. We've got a couple of serializers here for your CRUD, right? So you have, creating and versus updating, and then making sure that your data is being validated using these serializers. We don't have any tests. And we've got some URLs that will link up with our views, so that way you can make requests to an API to change stuff with your wants. Same thing, if we go back to the app view, we've got an admin site, and we've just got a path to our app. So nice and simple. Yeah, relatively no frills. This should be very similar to what your normal Django apps look like. And I've gone ahead and put in some sample data in there. So we've got I spun up a little admin panel. I am again a huge fan of testing things via the Django admin panel. It is like the best thing to do for testing. And you just need to create your super user and then run your server, go to the admin site, and you can play with all your data. So here you see that we have 3 wines in there. We've got these created at dates. We've got this apple muffins thing, and we've got this wood shaving thing. So pretty simple. Now let's go back to the main page. We see that we can't see anything. We already went to admin. So let's go to wines. And we see that we've got our get request is written nicely here. We've got all 3 of those. And let's go to the first one. So we can see that the first wine is wood shavings with all of this sort of stuff. And we can, let's see. We can make a post request or a put request if we so desire. I won't be doing that here, but we can delete lines. We can basically directly access all the data in our API from in our browser. So that's great for us as developers because it makes it really easy for us to test things without necessarily going to the admin panel, and makes it easy for us to extract and play with data. It also makes it easy for us to change our data via either doing it through the browser here or by going into Postman and making a get, put, post, delete request to our API endpoint. Now, can anybody think of a problem with making this open access like this? And why might it be this not be ideal?
Because anyone can come in and just delete all your data or write over it.
Exactly. Anyone can go in and see all your stuff. Now, for a example like this, where you have 3 wines, doesn't really matter. But let's say, for instance, that you were running a healthcare startup, and inside this database, you had a bunch of patients' medical records and information. Well, it's good for you to be able to go in, or for a doctor to be able to go in and edit the content in there. But you don't just want random people changing or editing that information. Also, moreover, you also don't want random people to be able to extract that information, right? That's confidential. So how can we? So the easy option for that is, let's go back to our code, which is over here. And let's go to our views and say, okay, if we don't want anyone to be able to access the data, then let's just get rid of the views. So, maybe we only want them to read it. We don't want anyone to edit it. So I'll remove post and put and delete. That's great because no one can edit it. That's bad because no one can edit it. So what we need a way to do is lock some certain permissions for certain types of people and allow other people to actually do the things they need to do. The easiest way for us to do that is by making this API essentially locked unless you can sign in with an account. And if you sign in with an account, then you get access to playing with the data, to accessing the endpoints, to doing all these requests, etc. So that process of connecting accounts to APIs with permissions is the start of a process called authentication. So the authentication framework or flow can be described relatively simply. Think of it kind of like you're entering your house. You don't want to leave your house door unlocked, so you have a lock. The first thing that you need to do, if let's say that you bought a new house, is you probably need to get the key. So in order to get the key, you're going to uh, give someone like your property manager like your name and your ID, and in return they'll give you a key back. That's kind of what happens here. So the first step is where the user will sign up with their username and password, and like giving your property manager your ID, and then where the property manager gives you the key, the API will then create a token for you in the backend. So that way, the next time you come up to the door or to the API and you put the key in the lock, you enter your username and password, the lock recognizes that your key fits that lock, so it unlocks. Same thing here. When you enter your username and password, the get token, oh, excuse me, the get token will confirm, is this username and password correlated to an existing token? And then if it is, it'll send the token back to the user. So that way the user can now use that token in all of its API requests. Without a token, you can't access the API requests. Yeah, Art, go ahead.
The I have a little bit of issue following your model because the property manager is requesting the token's returned. It would seem like it would be more secure if keys or tokens were issued, not necessarily requested, because anybody could come in and say, I'm the property manager, or anybody come in and request a key, right? Of course, who's ever going to return the key is going to vet them, but wouldn't it make more sense just to have tokens issued instead of requested?
So the tokens are something that's issued in the backend. So like as a user, for example, when you sign up for a Gmail account, you're never going to see your Gmail user token. That's only something that exists in the backend for all of that stuff. So think of this, if you're referring, what you're kind of getting at is something called permissions. So let's say 10 different people have an account, but I only want two of them to be able to edit things in the database. And I want everyone else to only be able to read it. So that is something that comes about when we start getting into user classes and permissions for your users and interacting with the API. But we won't be talking about that today. Yeah, so again, once you get that token back, and then it's kind of like you've unlocked the house door, and then from there you can do whatever you want. You can, go into the kitchen, you can enter a closet, you can, and the reason you're able to do all of that is because you're already inside the house. That's kind of similar to having the token sent back to you. Or another way to think about it is like if you're going to a museum and when you like enter the museum, they give you a ticket and you go to an exhibit and they ask you for your ticket and you can show them your ticket and then you go in. It's the exact same principle. The ticket here is kind of like the token. So you showing up is basically you as a user just clicking around. The other thing to keep in mind is tokens are often stored in your browser cache. So what does that mean? Well, if you log into a site and you click the Remember Me button, which people often do, then the next time you enter that website, like in a new tab, you'll still be able to enter right back in because that token is stored in the browser. It's a similar principle for APIs, but not identical, but similar. So if, let's say, you sign out then your token is no longer stored in the browser. So when you enter again, let's say you don't put in your username and password and you just go to the website, then it'll say, hey, you don't have a username and password, you don't have a token, so we're going to restrict your access. Same thing. If you put in an incorrect username and password, that combination is not linked to a token, so you aren't able to get it. So the tokens for APIs and authentication is pretty similar to just like username and password access to any website. Any questions about that as a concept before we start getting into the program? All right, so we know why authentication is useful and needed, particularly for APIs. So now let's move on to figuring out how we can implement it in Django. Note, Django has many different types of authentication. This one is just called token authentication. Also, this lies underneath the Django REST framework, which we believe we've already discussed. So let's go into our settings.py and start changing a couple things. The first thing that we were going to want to do is add a permission class, which should be, let's see, templates. I just want to see if it's already included in here. Not password validators. Okay, so it doesn't look like REST framework is included in here. So we'll put that, let's put that down at the bottom. So REST framework equals. And then we're just going to specify a couple things for the permission and authentication classes. Now, this is going to be a dictionary, and we'll specify that our default permission classes are, I'm going to copy paste this. It's a little bit easier. Is going to be that basically if you have authenticated, or rather, the default permission classes will specify that everything inside of your API should be protected by authentication by default. So if you are not authenticated, that line will specify that you can't get into it. Now, how do we authenticate? That's where the next line comes in. So here we're saying that the default way to authenticate is token auth. So if you are authenticated, then you can enter. If you are not authenticated, you do not have permission to use the API. You can authenticate via token auth. So again, this part is for the auth classes. This part is for the permission classes. So that's the basic first part of what we need to set up. Also, we need to include auth token inside our installed apps. So just going to include REST framework dot auth token in there separately from regular REST framework. And then now let's move on to actually starting to code this. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to stop running my server, which looks like it has. Let me see. Yep, that stopped running. And the reason it stopped running was also because I was saving things while coding. Which is a good thing about it is it will, if you're saving and it has a syntax error, it will kill your server. But I always recommend killing your server before you start coding. So let's go ahead and create a new app just for authentication. This is generally a good practice to do. Let's say, manage.py, start app counts. So usually you want to keep every part of your app compartmentalized. So we're going to keep, for example, the lines module separate from our authentication module, separate from if you had a store module, that would be separate. And it's just always a good idea to break your apps up into the constituent parts. All right, so we're going to start app accounts. So what's the first thing I should do after I've started a brand new app?
Add it to the settings.
Add it to installed apps. Thank you. So let's do that. So let's add in accounts, and let me move this actually to right under here. So now we've got all the Django stuff at the top, the REST framework stuff next, and then my apps next. All right. So let's go into our app here, and let's before we go into models, let's first go into our views. So the one thing to keep in mind is that Django does have a default user model. So unlike for the wine API, where we had to go in and create a model for wines, we don't need to create a user model. It's feeding off of nothing. Django again already gives us something that we can use. So the first thing that we want to do is create a view enabling us to add a new user. So there's a couple of things that we're going to have to import. The first ones that we're going to need to do is, let's say, from REST framework dot there's generics. We want to import a create API view. Again, this is all going through the API. Then from Django contrib, I believe it's auth models, import user. And again, this is just a standard general boilerplate for a user in Django. A couple of other imports that we're going to need are going to be some serializers. Oops. Serializers. Import a signup serializer, which I realize we don't have right now. So I'm going to add in a serializers.py file that we will play with shortly. And here, let me close out of some of these that we don't need. So we don't need requirements. We should keep admin. We should keep settings. And we'll just keep the views and serializers. So we've got those, and then the last thing that we're going to need to do is have our permission set up. So we'll go from REST framework permissions import allow any. So again, this allows any access. So it's super easy to access anything once you've authenticated. You don't need to have like sub layers of permissions. So I'm going to go ahead and copy paste in our sign up view class, and then we'll talk through it after. So let's forget about the serializer for now. And let's just break this down. So let's see. Who can I call in to volunteer? So Nick, what do you think is going on in our class or in our sign up view class based on what you know about Django views and what the code looks like it's doing?
Um, so it looks like it's pulling that all the objects in the user class, right? So user.objects.all and assigning it to query set within that. Because you have class sign up, and then it's serializing it essentially, and then permissions is allow any. Uh, so there's nothing. No, I don't see any like specific permissions, but then it's creating the if you go through and your serializer is valid, it's going to create your username. You can create your username and your password, and then it's assigning that username and password back to the user.objects.
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary. So thank you for the line by line breakdown. I think you got it completely correct. So based on that, Joe, what do you think? What is the sign of view doing overall, like as a module?
Would you mind actually just explaining that one more time? Just to make sure I'm
Nick, I'll turn that over to you.
Okay, so it's calling the class signup view. So you're setting a variable for your user.objects.all. You're serializing that, and then You don't really have any permissions because it's just setting permission classes to allow any. And then within that class, you have the method to create, which is creating the username and password and then saving it, like creating that user back into user objects.
So if we were, so we want anyone to be able to view this essentially, but that's why we have allow any in the brackets there under permissions classes. But if we wanted this to be, I guess, like somebody can't view it, or I guess for whatever reason, that's where we would put in this particular permissions there.
Yes, that's correct. But to backstep even further, what is this view doing? Remember, a view is not looking into data. A view is an endpoint that you access through the API. So you access sign up view. What is sign up view doing? Or more specifically, what is this function perform create doing?
It's just creating it's just creating a username and password for somebody that's going onto it. That's I want to view the API.
Or we can backtrack even more simply. It's creating a new user. It's adding a user to the list of users for our application. So you asked about for allow any. Well, let's say that we didn't have allow any in there. So you needed to have previously authenticated in order to access this view. So yeah, the view itself, when this view is accessed, it creates a new user and saves it to our user database. If we did not have line 13 and you tried to create a user, let me ask this. When you make an account on a website, are you usually expected to be signed into that website before you make an account? Or do you sign in, or do you make an account so that you can sign in?
The latter.
The latter. So that's why it's the exact same thing for sign up view. Sorry, I gotta move things around the bar. All right. As we discussed in the settings.py, the default setting here is that you have to be authenticated in order to access the API. So you have to be signed in order to do stuff. You don't want to be signed in order to create a user, because if you don't have a user for yourself, then you can't sign in to create your user. So that's why anybody needs to be able to access this view. So when you access the view through your endpoint, you give it your username and password, and then bam, you get a user account, and then you can use that user account to then access any of your other endpoints. So that makes sense to everyone. Any questions about what this is and why it's important? Okay, there's one other thing I would like you guys to notice. When we're doing user.objects.createUser, do we usually use the create user function when we're adding something to our database? Like just in general. Adam, you're shaking your head.
I guess if you're going to add a user, yeah, but I was thinking like there's a lot of other things in a database. Why would you constantly create a new user?
Well, usually we end up using just the regular create function if we're going to add something to any database in Django. It's blank.objects.create. So why do we need to use create user here? The answer to that is because create user is specifically tied to adding instances of that user class. Specifically, create user is able to deal with passwords and store those slightly more securely and safely than regular plain text. I don't remember what it does in the backend. I believe it probably hashes them somehow, but that's where create user is very useful because it's already adapted to user classes versus just the regular create. Art, go ahead.
If we wanted to put in certain criteria, is this where we would put it also, like some passwords have to be 8 characters long, uppercase, and a symbol, stuff like that. Is this where we would put those requirements?
I'll turn that question over to your classmates. What does everyone think? If we need to check the format of a password before it goes through, or if we need to check the format of any field before it gets saved, what do we need to apply to it in
A
Django?
validator.
Say that one more time.
A validator.
A validator, exactly. So you'd probably do that within your model rather than in your views. But you could also apply it within your views. So let's say the answer to that is yes. Any other questions about this one before we move on to the other parts that are a little bit easier and smaller? Okay, so will my code work if I run it right now? Will it let me create a user?
No,
Why not?
because you didn't set up your serializer.
All right, so let's write this down. So, things I forgot to do. Number one, set up my serializers. Okay, what else? So what needs to, so after, let's just go ahead, we have my serializer.py file over there. So let me just add in let's see, where are you? Class, what was this called? Sign up serializer, and we'll just do like a pass in there. Okay, so we will fill this out very shortly. And so let's hypothetically say that I did fill out my entire serializer now, and it's all good. So oh, and here, let me untab that. Will my code work now? All right, Art, I think I see you're shaking your head too. What's missing this time?
Well, functions don't generally work unless you have a print or return statement.
Well, let me spin that around to everyone else. Do we need a return statement if we're just creating a user?
I don't think so because it is adding it to the database because it's doing a create user.
Yep, the only thing that the function's doing is it's adding our user to the user database. Right? Think about if we go back to the settings.py and we look at creating random lines and adding them to the database, it's the same thing. We don't need to necessarily return something for it to generate an effect. There is one thing that we're missing here. So let's take a look at our accounts.py. Right? So we have our views are fully set up. So well, let's back up, right? So we don't need to create a new model because we're using the user model. So that's nice and easy. So models is checked off. We have a view to access stuff relating to our model, and we've designed a serializer that works for it. What do I need to do to connect my views to my localhost 8000, if anything?
You need to set up you need to make that your the URLs PY.
Exactly. So let's add that here. So set up my URL route to link my views to a URL. those are always like the steps that once you create your models, like what I like to do, I kind of have a flow that I've developed. So I'll go through, the first thing I'll do is create my model. Then I'll go ahead and create my validators along with it. I'll make my serializer. I'll make my views. And then I'll do my URLs. And then I'll do my tests somewhere in the middle. The last thing that I will usually do as well is once I finish putting my model on my validators, I will add model to the admin site. And that's something that's important to do as well, to register your models. We're not going to be doing that in this case because I didn't create a model for this. I just used the normal user model, which by default is visible in the admin panel. In the admin panel, you can see groups and users automatically, but more on that later. So this is just the usual flow that I like to do for Django. Okay, so let's move on to setting up my serializers. So does anyone remember what we need to import in order to create or a serializer in Django? Okay, well, we'll go through. So in order to create a serializer, you need to import from REST framework dot serializers. We're going to import a model serializer. As you know, we're running a serializer on a model. Now, what model are we serializing? Well, we're serializing not a custom model, but we're serializing the default Django user model. So let's import that too. So those are the only imports we need for our serializer. Now, the last thing that we need to do is specify what our serializer does or looks at. We're just going to create a meta class here. And once we do that, we'll just specify that the model in question is going to be the user model. And then the fields that we want to specify are going to be our username and password fields. So can anyone tell me what a serializer does before we move forward?
Doesn't it make whatever you're doing readable to the computer in JSON?
Exactly. Yes. So the readable to the computer part is good. The key thing is that it turns it into JSON. So a serializer turns your database object into JSON. That's really the main thing it's useful for. The other thing it's useful for is also can be helpful in turning JSON into a database object. So it's bi-directional. In this case, we're really only going to be relying on it for the first way, but knowing that it can do it reverse is very helpful too. So with our serializer set up now, we're just saying that the fields are going to be your username and password, nice and easy. So let's exit out of that. The other part that we need to do is we now need to set up our urls.py. So the first thing that we want to do for provide our routing is we need to, again, make our imports. So let's see if we have another urls.py that we can copy from. Yeah, we can definitely copy from here. That's the wine APIs. So let's bring that into our accounts one and see what we need to change. So we're importing path, which is great. And we don't want to import views we can import views that way. But what I'd rather do is I'll just import from views. I'll bring in my sign up view. And then we'll just nix that and nix that. And then we'll do sign up view, sign up view. Okay, so let's see. Well, the first thing we should probably do is add in a place where we can sign up. So let's say that we're going to sign up at a sign up page. Seems like a logical choice. So what does this mean? So this means when I go to localhost 8000 /sign up, that should essentially task me with the create username and password. And then after I access that, it should save to database and then generate token. Well, I guess I should really just save to the database because as Art correctly pointed out, we're not returning anything, so we're not generating anything. We're just saving something to the database. The other half of this is that we're going to need to get a token in order to use in our authentication. So let's go ahead and add in a get token path as well, yeah, in order to get that token. And now we're in a little bit of a stuck place. We don't know how to get a token. Our views don't have any information about tokens in there, and now we didn't forget about any of those. Our token somehow is related to our database. Is there any way we can get a token? The answer is yes. Thankfully, Django gives us a relatively handy way to do so through the REST framework. So we can do that by going to our REST framework, auth token, and views, and then we can import the obtain auth token function from in there. So now in here, we can run obtain auth token. So the last thing that we're going to need to do is go back to our big urls.py, which is in wines, which is our app. And now let's go ahead and do a path here. And let's add in like an accounts path. And then we'll just in counts. And then we'll include accounts.urls. Does that overall process make sense so far? Any questions about this? All right, so just to backtrack, we are not creating a custom model. We're just using the Django auth general generic user model. We created a view that saves to your data, that saves a new user to your database, that anyone can access that view because you don't want to have an account, you need to create one. We then set up our URLs in order to access that endpoint and obtain our token. And then one step previous to that, we then connected our new app for accounts to our new app, for accounts to our overall project through the higher top level urls.py. Let's go ahead and see if this works. So, what should my first step be in the console? We added a new app, we played around with a bunch of stuff. What should we do?
Migrate.
All right. Is there anything I need to do before I hit migrate?
Make migrations.
Perfect. Yep. So you always want to make your migrations first. And that is exactly the reason why. All right, so from views, import signup view. It doesn't like that. Well, let's see. Somebody walk me through this error. The one thing I would like for you guys to do is get some practice with debugging here as well. So let's see. Where did this error happen? Well, it looks like it happened somewhere. Can anyone break down what's going on? I'll give you a hint. The relevant part of things is somewhere in here.
It's not seeing your views in the app folder, I think.
Okay, so which file do I need to go to that contains the error?
urls.py.
urls.py. Thank you. So Django will often show you just like a cascade of errors. Now, these are all relevant in the chain, but usually what you want to look for is the error like that links to something in your files. So forgetting all this stuff with like importing lib bootstrap, because these are not files that whew, that you created. So what we do want to look at is this one right here, where we're referencing account URLs, and this one, as Nicole said, where we're going to our urls.py and we're importing signup view, and it says there's no module named views in there. So let's go back to here, go to my urls.py, and aha. Okay, what am I missing here? Why? But I have a views file, it's right there. So why can't it pull signup view? That seems so strange. Anyone got an answer for me?
Views.py or yeah, because then you'll have the relative path.
So how do I make the path relative?
/ views.py.
We could do that. Or the way that you will usually do it in Python is you'll do a dot views to specify that it's in the same directory. So let's try this again. Okay, no changes detected. So we'll do a Python manage.py migrate, and it added some migrations for auth token, which is exactly what we're looking for. So now let's go ahead and spin up my run server. Run server. Server is running. So let's go ahead and open up this tab. Go in here. Perfect. So we've got my admin panel, my wines, and my accounts. Let's go ahead and see all the wines. Uh-oh. I think, is my website broken? Because I don't think I can see anything here. That's really strange. Let me go in and see like if I can access a specific one. I'm still getting this error. This is exactly what we want to happen. I don't have a username or password. I don't have anything. So because of that, I can't authenticate with the website. I don't have a token to use. So my website is working as intended because I am now blocked from accessing this. So how can I resolve that? How can I, instead of being blocked by my own website, actually get in and start making changes?
Create a super user.
Yep, well, we could do a super user,
Or you
but
just
solution based on what we've been doing.
create a username and password.
Create a username and password. Exactly. So, I'm trying to pull up my Postman, but now it wants me to sign in, apparently, to Postman, which is something I haven't done in a little while. So let me try pulling this up and making sure it doesn't crash. Oh, I just signed it. Okay.
You must have cleared out your cache. Token's gone.
Probably. All right. There we go. Okay, so I'm back in Postman. So what endpoints do I need to go to in order to create my user? So let's go back to oh, let me resume my screen share. That's why it wasn't working. So let's examine what URL we need to point to or examine before we can create or where we can create our user. So as we say here, we go to localhost and sign up or localhost 8000 / sign up, but that won't actually work because we need to go to localhost 8000 / accounts / sign up first. Right, so this is going to be our endpoint. So actually, why don't we try this in the browser? I'm curious to what this will look like. So let's go to accounts, do a /, and then let's do sign up. Sign up serializer takes no arguments. Okay, well, let's see if there's a problem in my code. So we'll go back here. We'll go to my serializers. Let's see, what am I missing? But while I'm debugging this, does anyone have any ideas as to what I'm missing in this class? I did get an error. The error that I got said that sign up serializer takes no arguments, and it says that's a problem. Is there something I'm supposed to inherit from, or something like that?
Shouldn't there be like a input parameter,
What would the input parameter be?
like the models, or
We need
usually
to import the model serializer. So let me go ahead, stop my server now, and I'm going to remake my migrations just in case. Okay, that should be fine. Rerun my server again. Go back to Chrome, refresh the page. Ta-da! We now have a beautiful signup page. And Art, this one's for you. So as you can see, there is a default validator for the username, which tells you how long it can be and what things you're supposed to include. So let me just create a user. Let's call this test, and I'll create a very simple password of test2. We'll go ahead and make a post request to this. It now says that we get a 201 back, right? So my post request has successfully been accepted, which is great. That's exactly what I want to see. So the next thing that I need to do, now that I've created my account, is I want to get back my auth token. Let's go back one level to accounts and now go to get token. Okay, let's see, method get not allowed. All right, well, let's go back to Postman, wherever that has disappeared to in my 15 tabs. Postman. And let's try doing the exact same thing. So let's make a post request in Postman to, let me move my camera, post. And now let's go ahead and add in, we don't need any auth. Let's go ahead and add in some stuff into our bot. Does anyone remember how to add things to a body in Postman or in a post request? What's the format look like?
it's JSON, so it's the curly brackets, and then kind of looks like an object, but not really.
Yeah, it's just another dictionary. So lucky for you guys, I copy pasted in our username and password from sign up. So we have that information. And again, JSON equals dictionary. That's it. If someone asks you what JSON is, it's a dictionary as a file. Or just honestly just say it's a dictionary. Really simple. So let's go ahead and submit this to my get token endpoint. And if all goes well, my request gets sent, and boom, I now have my authentication token. So, okay, great. I have my token. So what? What can I do with my token? Well, again, what do we use the token for? Authorization in order to access our original API. So let's try going to our wines and just getting, let's skip like the second one, just for kicks. So ordinarily, and again, this should be a GET request. So also I'm going to copy all of this in here for now. And we're just going to try our GET request. So right now we don't have our authentication in here. So if we run this, I get a 401 unauthorized error because unauthenticated, and it says I need to pass in the right auth credentials. So how do we pass in our auth credentials? We do not pass them in through the body. Instead, we're going to pass these in through authorization. And let's see, let's just say that this is going to be basic auth. That's not it. Always forget which one of these it is. think it's probably bearer token. So let's try putting in our token now and hit send. Okay, well, that usually ought to work. The only problem is that there is a bunch of different tokens in here. It's definitely not JWT. It's not OAuth. It's not API key. Pretty sure it should be one of these. Okay, let me double check this very quickly. Or we can add it, probably also add it as just a regular header. So let me see if we say, where is authorization? And then we're just going to say token and then paste in this whole thing. There we go. So turns out I was incorrect for the thing we're doing right now. You don't want to go through authorization up here. We want to just add it to our headers with an authorization key, and then with the value being token, space, and then our whole token. And now we can access things. So that's how we can go from allowing anybody to access any endpoint to forcing them to make a username and password, log in, get their authentication token, and then access their API using the token. Questions on that process, flow, need for it, or anything like that? Yes, Art.
I guess I just need to get refreshed on something because our body is blank, correct?
Yes, the body is blank.
Okay, so why in this case do we not need a body, but we needed it in previous occasions?
So,
But I guess my question is, what was the purpose of the body?
so what was the previous type of request that we did? Was it another GET request?
Oh, maybe it might have been, yeah, I think, well, we did a get and a post. I know.
Which one was which?
Oh, maybe the post is tied to the body.
Exactly. So for a GET request, you usually don't need a body. In some cases, you might. In this specific instance, you don't. But for a post request, you do need a body. When we did it for get token, that was a post request. And for that is the one where we put in the whole body.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right.